Hayley, a museum learning assistant at Lynn Museum. In this video, I'm going to be showing you how to create an ancient Roman costume for a married woman. Throughout history, clothing has been used by society to immediately tell the viewer the wealth and social status of the wearer, and ancient Rome was no exception. From the colour of their clothes, where red and purple were expensive colours, to the materials the clothing was made out of. Where silk was expensive, wool and linen were cheaper because the materials were more widely available. Ancient Romans also used jewellery to show their wealth and status, from the fastenings to the body jewellery that they wore. Lynn Museum has a couple of examples of these: a gold ring, which is an expensive material and therefore the owner would have been wealthy or of a high social status, to the bronze armlet or bracelet, which is a cheaper material and therefore the owner may have been lower down in the social status or just not as wealthy. The clothing I'm going to be showing you how to make are a tunic, a stola, and a belt to hold both dresses together. A tunic is a sleeved dress that went all the way down to the ankle and could be worn by both unmarried and married women. However, a stola could only be worn by married women and held the same level of respect in society as the male-worn toga we all associate with ancient Rome today. A stola had no sleeves and also was worn all the way down to the ankle. Both dresses could come in different colours and lots of fabric was used as drapery. The dresses were designed to protect the modesty of the woman and were fastened using buttons or fibullae, which we'll be talking about later. To create the costume, you'll need cotton or linen fabric. The amount of fabric you'll need will depend on your height. 8 buttons for the tunic and 2 for the stola. Thread to match the colour of your fabric. A needle for hand stitching and a sewing machine for the initial sewing. Measuring tape. Tailor's chalk. Pins. Fabric shears and an iron. First you'll need to get some measurements. Roman tailors would have had slaves to help, but you can grab a pet, another person in your house, or measure yourself. Measure from your shoulder to your ankle for the length of the dress, and from shoulder to shoulder for the placement of the buttons later. Now that you have your measurements, you can fold your fabric in half so that the right side of the fabric is inside and the wrong side is facing out. And mark your height with your tailor's chalk and measuring tape or ruler. Remember to add a few inches extra onto the bottom for draping and cut away any excess. I had around 2 inches until the edge, so I left it without cutting. Make sure to keep all of your off cuttings for making a belt later. Pin down the fabric around 1 inch away from the edge for sewing, and cut to separate the fabric where it is folded over. Move to the opposite end of your fabric and mark a straight edge if your fabric is crooked from being cut from the roll. Pin in place and trim the excess. Next, find the top of the dress on the fabric and measure and mark 10.5 inches for the armholes. Ensure that you mark both armholes and both sides of the fabric. With all of the fabric preparation done, we can now sew the 2 pieces of the fabric together. You can do this by hand, but it would be quicker to use a sewing machine. Use a straight stitch and sew ½ inch away from the edge. Sew all the way down both of the longer edges of the fabric, but leave the armholes. These are going to be the side seams of your tunic. Once you've finished sewing, trim your excess threads and remove the pins. After this, it is optional to press your seams open with an iron, but it will make sewing easier and have a cleaner finish if you do. Fold open your seam and press. Next, we're going to finish the seam with a durable flat felled seam. To begin, one side of the seam allowance needs to be trimmed so that there is one wide edge and one slim edge on either side of the seam. Alternatively, if you want to finish your costume quickly, you can leave the seam allowances raw and skip to the hemming or button steps, but keep in mind that the fabric will fray. Both seams will need to be pressed again by folding the wide edge over the seam edge and ironing flat. To finish the seam, we're going to use a whip stitch. Fold the raw edge of the seam allowance under and hold into place with your fingers or pins. Poke your needle through the bottom layer of the fabric, being careful to catch only a couple of threads so that the stitch isn't visible on the outside of the tunic. Then pass the needle up through the folded seam allowance and repeat. This will be the longest part of the process, which will take a few hours. To speed it up, you can use a sewing machine, but the stitches will be visible on the outside of the tunic. After finishing your side seams, now we need to finish the rest of the edges by hemming. Take your measuring tape and tailor's chalk and measure 1/2 inch away from the armhole edges and the top and bottom edges of the tunic. Make sure to do this on the wrong side of the fabric. Once marked, we're going to press the flat-felled side seams so that they lay flat. Then we're going to fold over the rest of the raw edges to the wrong side of the fabric until they meet the 1/2 inch marks and iron down. Again, we're going to finish the hems of the armholes and top and bottom of the tunic by whip stitching in the same way as the flat-felled side seams. This will again take hours and can be sped up by using a sewing machine, but of course the stitches will be visible on the right side of the tunic if you do. When you've finished, iron the hems flat. Roman clothing had two main types of fastenings for their heavy drapery. One were buttons and two were fibulae. We're going to be using buttons today, and they could be fastened using a loop on the clothing or sewn directly onto the garment. And they weren't too dissimilar to the buttons that we see today. Fibulae, or fibula for a single, is a type of brooch, and we can see two examples here now. We have the Colchester bronze brooch, which doesn't have its pin anymore, and we also have another bronze brooch where you can see the pin and how it fastens onto the clothing. Next, we're going to mark the placement of the button fastenings. Consult your shoulder width measurement and determine how much space you'll need for the first button to sit roughly halfway between your neck and shoulder, whilst also allowing for some drape. I determined 7 inches, so folded the fabric in half to find the middle, then marked 7 inches on either side. The other buttons should be evenly spaced, so measure the rest of the sleeve and divide by 3 to determine the amount of space between the 3 buttons and mark onto the fabric, ensuring that one button is at the end of the sleeve. Make sure to mark both sides of the tunic and sew the buttons in place. Our tunic is finished, but the Roman costume is not yet complete without a stola. If you wish to only make a tunic, please skip to the belt step. The steps to make a stola are almost exactly the same as the tunic and requires the same materials. Pick a complementary fabric colour to your tunic and use only 2 buttons. When you prepare your fabric for sewing, measure it against your tunic to make sure your stola will be the same length and add 1 inch onto the end for the top and bottom seam allowances. Follow the rest of the preparation steps, but for the stola, leave 12.5 inches for the armholes to leave enough room for the tunic sleeves underneath. Now follow the rest of the steps until you reach the button fastenings. We're only using 2 buttons this time, so consult your shoulder measurement and tunic once again to determine a placement that will allow for drape. I like some extra drape on my stola, so I measured 9 inches on either side of the centre. Our tunic and stola are now complete. Now all we need is a belt to hold it all together. For the belt, measure your waist and cut or find 3 strips of fabric from your off-cuttings that are double your waist measurement. I chose my tunic red because I like the pop of colour with the stola. Tie the strips to a table or chair leg to maintain tension, and braid. Then knot the 2 ends. When braiding, fold the raw edges inward to help prevent fray, or alternatively, you can sew the edges of the strips closed before braiding for a neater finish. Congratulations, you have now made a complete Roman costume of a tunic, stola and belt. Enjoy it to your heart's content.